Thank you for coming here to CBW on a Thursday evening for our Meet the Artist series. My name is Sarah Danziger. I'm the Education Program Manager here at CBW. And Meet the Artist this evening that we used to host it like every Thursday for 3 years. We just sort of broke it down a little bit to 1 to 2 times a month, so hope you'll still come out. But it's made possible by generous grants from the Arnold and Augusta Newman Foundation, as well as the National Endowment for the Arts. So thank you. Before we get started, a couple announcements. On February 10th, we'll be back here on a Tuesday for our photo club. This month's photo club is kind of like night. It's a little similar to tonight in that we're open later and we have night hours for the galleries, but we'll also be joined by a local arts and culture magazine called Good Neighbor, and they do their zine launch. They're going to be doing their zine launch here, and there'll be some snacks and refreshments and an opportunity to meet their their editorial team, and listen to some music in this great new 4 exhibitions that we have going on right now. So please come out for that or spread the word. And then on February 21st, we'll be joined for a conversation moderated by the curator of photography at the Lehman Loeb Art Center, Jessica D. Breyer. It's chronic Lyme, disability advocacy, and the role of art in managing, understanding, and living with illness. And that conversation is in conjunction with Jiatong Lu's show about chronic Lyme behind us called Nowhere Land. We'll be joined by Jiatong Lu, the artist, microbiologist Holly Ahern, and investigative journalist Mary Beth Pfeiffer. So that'll be a really interesting conversation. That's free. It's on February 21st. It's a Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. So please come out. I think that should be a really interesting conversation. So now, without further ado, I will introduce tonight's artist, Dale Rio, who's a photographist whose work explores issues such as women's rights and humanity's relationship with the natural world. Utilizing film and historic photographic processes, Dale employs straight photography to document the world around her and also creates conceptual work in response to that world. Her photographs have been shown extensively in the US, as well as in England, Germany, New Zealand, and Spain. They reside in private collections and have been reproduced in countless publications. She has authored 1 book and co-authored a second. You'll have to tell us about those because they're not in your bio. Dale received a BA in studio art from the Smith College in 1993 and an MFA in photography from Pratt Institute in 1996. Upon her return to the States, Dale embarked upon a varied photographic career that includes freelancing, serving as a master darkroom printer, teaching, curating, editing, and currently working as a forensic photographer. Dale has been involved with numerous photo and art centers across the country, and in 2015, she co-founded the Halide Project, a Philadelphia-based nonprofit whose mission is to support the support of alternative and historic processes in photography. And in 2021, she launched Point A to Point B, Analog Explorations, a print publication that features travel and place-based alternative process photographic work. And in 2022, she founded Lux at Libra, an initiative that seeks to recognize the leading role women play in alternative process photography and create new opportunities for them. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Dale. Thank you. Sorry. Just full screen. Nicole, what did you say to do, Nicole? Got it.
All right, thank you everyone for coming tonight. And I also want to thank Sarah and Nicole, CPW, for inviting me here. I also wanted to thank UDIP for sort of fostering the relationship, so thank you. And it's nice to see a lot of familiar and friendly faces in the audience. I think I was telling a couple people I do Zoom all the time, but it's been quite a while that I've spoken in front of live human beings, so bear with me. And I do have notes, and I have to put on my glasses. Okay. Not yet. But recognizing that probably most of you in the audience are artists yourselves. We all know how busy artists can be, and we have to hustle. In addition to making your own work, you're trying to get it out there in the world. You may be hustling to try to get teaching work or freelance gigs, or you have a full-time job or an outside job to support your art making. So I'm sure you guys can relate that I don't often have time to kind of ruminate on my work. And so I'm especially thankful that giving this talk tonight has sort of provided an excuse for me to sit down and look at my work, recent work, but over the years, and kind of like interrogate it. And let's see, in doing so, like kind of looking at and recognizing some patterns within my work over the years and how I approach image making. And so this is kind of the theme that I came up with for tonight's talk, because in looking at my work, oh God, now I really need my glasses. No, it's okay. Put my old lady glasses on. Okay. So yeah, I always kind of thought of myself as being a very project-based photographer. But in going over my work for tonight's talk, I realized that there were some times in my life, and also, bless you, some particular genre that I approached in a little more organic style. So having the freedom to kind of shoot and then look at the work afterwards, like shoot without an agenda and look at the work afterwards and kind of figure out what tied it all together. And so those are two different ways of approaching art making. And I think it's always a conversation. You might have it with your peers or with your students, like how they prefer to make their work or how you operate as an artist and a photographer. So yeah, that's kind of the topic that I landed on for tonight's talk. So I wanted to kind of start out at the beginning, not the very beginning, but when I was fresh out of grad school, I didn't consider teaching right off the bat. I had grown up with that those who can do, those who can't teach ethos kind of drilled into me. And so I really wanted to kind of make a living with my photography, doing photography. So I thought to myself, like, what are the things that I'm interested in right now that I could foresee myself being interested in spending the majority of my time shooting. I wasn't necessarily interested in photographing things that held no interest for me personally, because then it would seem too much like a job rather than making a living through something I was passionate about. So some of the things that I liked back then when I was a youngster, I was very into music, which I still am. So I did a lot of photography for music magazines, record labels, both on location, in the studio. I did performers of various ilk. This was a knife thrower called the Great Throdini. I did some fashion work every now and again. And with all this work, with people as my subject matter, I got a good on-the-job sort of training with working with people and also with lighting. So whether it was on location using fill flash or in the studio, it was really, like on-the-job training as to how to envision what I wanted out of the shoot and then figure out how to light it to execute that vision. So a lot of the kind of quote unquote training I got was while shooting. So it was very worthwhile and lessons learned that I still use to this day. And so a lot of this earlier work was around or featuring people who were in subcultures that I was a part of. So in addition to the musicians, I was photographing a lot of tattoo conventions and doing stories, essays about tattooists. And in doing so, I started thinking about, and this was in the 90s, right? So you have to kind of go back in your time machine. In the 90s, there was still a stigma around people who were tattooed. Tattooing was still illegal in a lot of places. I got my first tattoo when tattooing was illegal, still in New York City, where I lived at the time. I went to the first tattoo convention in the city and the first one in Massachusetts when tattooing became legal in those places. So I was thinking a lot about the kind of misperceptions surrounding people who got tattooed. So my first environmental portrait project involved these people who were heavily tattooed. Prior to that, in addition to like my the freelance and commercial work I was doing, like my graduate thesis was self-portraiture and combining self-portraits with text. So this was kind of my first environmental portrait project. And so I worked with people who were heavily tattooed, and they decided on the location. So I had them think of places that were representative of them as people, outside of just what was adorning their skin, but what made them them. And so I traveled a lot, going to different parts of this country, different countries, while I was on these freelance gigs, and photographed these people in the places that meant something, held meaning for them. And then I was also very much involved with the neo-burlesque scene. And so again, the misperception around the people, particularly the women who were doing burlesque, performing burlesque. And so a lot of them, there were a few people who made a living performing or teaching, but the vast majority of people who were doing burlesque were doing it because they had a great love for this American art form. So they had jobs during the day that would support their performing at night. And so I wanted to depict that dichotomy of the day existence versus their nighttime existence. So I did this series where I was photographing burlesque performers in costume at their day jobs. So yeah, so it kind of highlighted the glamour of their nightlife versus like the mundane aspects of their daytime existence. There's a lot of humor in the shoots. Humor is integral to burlesque. So it was very, a lot of humor, showing that dichotomy. You know, this woman was a PhD student while she was performing. So just again, like showing the various aspects of someone's personality and trying to counter judgments that people might make about the people who are taking their clothes off in front of an audience at night. She taught English as a second language. So as I was doing this freelance work and working on some of these other portrait projects, I was traveling a lot, like I mentioned, both in the US and also internationally. And I always loved to travel. And so whenever I went somewhere, I would take extra time to work on my portrait projects, but I would also explore wherever I happened to be, whether it was a city or a more rural area. So I was always very in love with traveling. And so I always had a camera with me, obviously. So I would take photos of the places that I was visiting, but never considered myself a landscape photographer, even though a lot of it was landscape photography, because it wasn't something I think that fell within the parameter of a particular project. It seemed like kind of side work. And so that's not how I define myself as a photographer. I lived on the West Coast kind of off and on for a few years. And so I spent, maybe not a lot of time, but I made several trips and along Route 66. And at one point I had the opportunity to drive the entirety of Route 66 with a friend of mine. And so once again, I was shooting the whole time, shooting various things, whatever caught my eye. And going back to the imagery afterwards and looking at all of the negatives that I chose to print, I found that I was drawn to the abandoned aspects of Route 66. So not the buildings that were kept up pristinely or renovated or kind of tourist draws, but I was really drawn to these abandoned structures or abandoned buildings. And so even though I went to photograph without an agenda, looking back over the images afterwards, it was this abandonment that sort of coalesced into the project that I called Forgotten 66. And so I think this was kind of the first thing that I shot that wasn't project-based going into it, that sort of coalesced after the shooting, the photography took place.
What is that?
Yeah, it's an upside down car frame with like a crumbling building in the background. Okay, some of you might be able to relate to this sentiment, right? So I'd been shooting film all my life. I was working like concurrently with doing the freelance work. I also worked as a master darkroom printer. So the darkroom and film photography was my life. It's all that I was doing. And then digital came along. And I had absolutely no desire to transition to digital. I liked the way I worked. I loved being in the dark room, and I really had no desire to change that. And also at the time, I was not very impressed by the quality of what I was seeing from digital cameras and digital printing, especially coming from my background as a darkroom printer, doing a lot of fine art printing and very high-end commercial printing. I saw a lot of like subpar digital prints on gallery walls, and I was just like, it's awful. Why are you showing this? So I had no desire to do that myself. So I have to say that decision did have a negative effect on my ability to support myself financially. So I was a little bit lost for a while there. I had a period where the freelance work continued for a while until clients sort of realized that they could hire someone to shoot digital for cheaper. And eventually that kind of faded away. The darkroom that I had been printing at in the city for like a decade eventually closed. I was kind of lost. I also had a new living situation, so I was not really a part of some of those scenes or subcultures that I had been earlier. And I also didn't have a lot of extra income to travel to events and stuff like that. So eventually, I actually went back to school in my 40s for forensic science, and I got a master's in forensics. And I started working as a crime scene investigator in a totally new city. And even though I was running the community darkroom there, and I was teaching classes and workshops, and I was still doing my own shooting, not being fully engaged with photography every day like I had been for most of my life, I did feel a bit disconnected from my own photography. So I started doing one pinhole photo a day. So I was working night shift for most of the 2 years that I had this particular job. And so I'd get up during the day before my shift, take a pinhole photo of something. There was no prescribed subject matter. But this is one of my early self-portraits. So I mentioned I had done self-portraits earlier when I was in grad school. And so I put myself in front of the camera again a few times with this endeavor of doing a pinhole photograph every day. And it kind of coalesced into a series. So many of you are probably familiar with pinhole photography and how it requires a pretty long exposure. So I found that effects like this were happening where because I'm coming in and out of the frame, I become invisible in parts. And then the natural world that is my setting for these is visible through me. And so this kind of became a series, self-portrait series called Reconciliation. That is, it relates to like my belief that humanity needs to regain a sense of balance with the natural world. So in these images, I'm not the subject. I'm as much of the subject as the natural world that I'm a part of. So once again, this is something I just started shooting without an agenda. And then looking at some of the early photos that I was actually in, it coalesced into a project. And so this is something I'm still working on. I tend to take a pinhole camera whenever I travel. And then another camera that I have with me all the time, I keep it in my courier bag, is my Holga. And so for decades, I've been shooting with the Holga, but with no end, right? So I have these projects that I'm working on, but then I always have this Holga with me, then I'm just shooting whatever catches my interest. And for a while, these images just sort of lived as prints in boxes with no outcome and kind of no idea what the outcome could potentially be. But starting in 2020, I put out a couple zines of my writing. And after a few years, with a lot of these Holga images that I was fond of, but not quite sure what to do with, I decided to do a zine that contained these Holga images paired with text that I had written. And so the text was not written in response to the images, and the images weren't taken in response to the text. They were kind of existing separately. And so I combed through the text and sort of pulled out these short written pieces that I do and paired them with images. And so they might not directly relate to the images, but there was some kind of resonance between the writing and the images that was there for me. So again, something that I was shooting without an intended outcome that sort of found its own voice and found its own outcome. So I hadn't done much portrait work in quite a while. Like I mentioned, I wasn't really a part of these social groups that I had been earlier because of where I moved to in my living situation. But around 2017, 2018, I found out, or I read about the Maasai Olympics, which is an event that happens in Kenya. And it provides an alternative to lion killing as a rite of passage for the young Maasai men. The elders in the area had noticed a depletion of the lion population, so they approached a local conservation organization called the Big Life Foundation to see if they could come up with a way for these young men to have a rite of passage that didn't require killing lions. So they came up with this idea of the Messiah Olympics. And so in 2018, I traveled to Kenya and I did portraits of some of the participants and the coaches taking part in the Olympics, and also some of the anti-poaching rangers that work for the Big Life Foundation. And I had a really great translator who really facilitated all of these shoots. And they were very limited in time, so it was very challenging in that respect. But having someone to work with like that was very instrumental in these images and making these images. In the following year, I went to South Africa. I had read about an all-women's anti-poaching unit in South Africa. So I went and spent a couple days with them and did mainly portraits, but also I did some images of them while they were on patrol. And then also around that time, you probably remember the Kavanaugh Supreme Court nomination hearings, which inspired me. That's probably not the best word to use, but it awoken within me the desire to do a project that's centered around the issue of sexual assault. And so with my background in portraiture, and coming back to portraiture, I started working on this environmental portrait project called Look at Me. And so I mentioned a little bit with some of the earlier projects. I work in a very collaborative manner with all of my portrait projects. And with this one and the next one that we'll see, they are extremely collaborative. So the idea behind this project was to depict survivors from a place of strength as self-defined. So recognizing that after having an experience like that, different people respond in different ways. It takes different paths for people to regain, find, develop a sense of strength. Some people have a more difficult time than others, but it was really inspired by this conversation or this thought process about how the different parties in sexual assault are viewed and whose life and whose future is worth protecting, and the value that we place on these different parties who are involved. So I started that project. For the recent work, I'm going to have to apologize. I'm not a very good scanner of negatives. And so a lot of these color images are scans of negatives. So they're not quite as lovely as the prints are. So I apologize for that. The people who I photograph also play a very big role in the editing process. So both with the images, they take part in that process. And then I interview everyone as well. And they also take part in the editing of the text. So the collaboration is not only with kind of conceptualizing and executing the photo shoot, but also in the final manifestation of both images and words. I also recognize with this image in particular is a good example. Some people want very much to share their stories, but might not want their faces or their names included. Or some people don't want images shared in a particular way. So I always respect the people's choices who I'm working with. And so we work together to find a way where they can share their story, maybe with a pseudonym, or we craft the shoot in a way where their face is not visible or fully visible. So again, it's a way that I'm collaborating with them to create an image that they're happy with in representing them the way they want to be represented. And then that previous project, Look at Me, because of the kind of sensitive nature of the subject matter, it's a little slow moving. And so while I was working on that, this other idea was rattling around my head of a project in a similar vein, but working with women who had chosen not to procreate. And again, was partly inspired by J.D. Vance and his comments on cat ladies. And so I wanted to reframe that conversation in a way where women who had chosen not to have kids could depict themselves and speak for themselves through their images and their words, and not have who they are defined by someone else, particularly someone else who has a particular agenda. So I embarked on this project, which again, I give them a prompt, which is a little bit different from the previous project. I talk to them about who they are, how they define themselves, what are the most important things in their lives, and based on the responses to those prompts, again, we craft a way to shoot. And then once again, they play a part in selecting the final image. And again, I interview them and they do play a part in editing of the final text. And I think this work relates to my earlier work in also trying to challenge assumptions that people make about particular demographics. Okay, and this is kind of going back to the idea of shooting something and kind of having no idea what you're shooting or what your idea is or your goal is, but just going for it and hoping that it will all kind of shake out in the end. And I did kind of realize that landscape photography, even though I never really considered myself a landscape photographer, that's one realm or one genre that has allowed me a little more freedom than my portrait projects which are very like proscribed. So in 2021, I went to Iceland, and it was one of the first places that opened up to visitors after the pandemic lockdowns. And so I went there as soon as I could. And the thing that really made the biggest impact on me there was being able to see this broad span of geologic time like simultaneously. So there was an active volcano doing its thing at the time. And so even though when I was there, it wasn't actually like spewing, there were freshly laid lava flows that were very hot, still smoking. So you could see those, like the freshly laid lava, and go down the road and see a field of volcanic rock, and then continue on and see a black sand beach, which is made up of basically pulverized volcanic rock. So it really kind of like blew my mind how all of this stuff, this vast span of time, is visible in one place. So that just kind of led to this rabbit hole of reading about time, geologic time, different concepts, ways people have looked at time throughout time, and also looking at researching some of these kind of extreme landscapes, so Arctic, subarctic landscapes, how time manifests differently in different places. And so I have all this information like rattling around my brain, not knowing quite what to do with it. And I had a residency at the Kilpisjärvi Biological Station in Finland. And it's a subarctic region. And so it was summer when I was there, so 24 hours of light, which can do your head in, let me tell you. So I was going on a lot of midnight hikes, and it was just this very impressive subarctic landscape. And I made this image. Obviously, it's a panoramic image, but it's made up of several different images, all like physically put together. And the fact that things don't line up perfectly, I think really resonated with me in thinking about time and the glitchiness of time and time related to memory and the imperfect recall in the way that memory exists or functions. And so I made this image and it really stuck with me. So I sort of honed in on volcanic regions on the planet. So I started to travel to places that were volcanically active, or historically very volcanically active. And I continued to do this sort of process of taking these quasi-panoramic images, but are compiled of multiple images that don't exactly line up. You can see that the clouds don't line up. Sometimes I shift myself a little bit and the actual landscape doesn't line up. And so it's that like striving for a perfect image, but not being able to actually create it because of the glitchiness of the movement of time, the passage of time. It seemed to me like a good way to kind of bring in that thought or the exploration of time that is still fascinating to me, and how to express that visually, which has been the challenge the whole time. These thoughts rattling around and their relationship to these places on the planet, but how do I transform those thoughts in these places into photographic images? So I've been to a couple different places in Italy, Chile, and Japan. In a lot of these places, there's evidence of human activity. And it's also a very interesting idea of how these places, especially these volcanic places, volcanic activity usually leads to very fertile soil. So you have people living in proximity to these places that could devastate them at any moment. So that interaction to me is very interesting, even though I'm trying not to include humans in this, but it's fascinating, so maybe I should. So again, suggestions are welcome. And I think that's it for my own work. I did want to spend just a couple of minutes at the end talking a little bit about community and sort of, I don't want to say giving back to the community, that sounds a little highfalutin, but the importance of community. Many of you know me from the Halide Project, but wherever I traveled to, wherever I lived, I always got involved with whatever darkroom was there. And then when I moved to Philly, I found it to be very inhospitable to darkroom photographers, which I'd never experienced before. And at the time, I thought that was going to be like my forever home. So with that, I wish was there when I moved there. And so it's really fulfilling that need. We do workshops. I curate the exhibitions there. It's a really great space. And like I said, even though I don't get to partake in it all the time, it's created a space for like-minded people. And then also, I think Sarah mentioned all this already, so this is all hat. A couple of years ago, 5 years from now, actually, I started a print publication called Point A to Point B Analog Explorations, and it features analog work of a variety of processes that's place or travel based.
because that's, again, travel is one of my passions. And so I found how I didn't want it to be a travel magazine. So a lot of the work is conceptual and it has to do with place. But it's been a really great opportunity
to meet artists, discover new amazing work, and then also be able to share that work with an audience. And then last but not least, I also started Lux et Libera, which is an initiative. It's not a formal nonprofit or business, but it's an initiative centered around women working in alternative process photography. So I've curated a couple shows, and they're usually, what's the word? Like location based. So local artists to wherever the gallery is. So I've done a few of those. I have another one coming up in Connecticut that opens next month. We've done a couple in-person events like workshops and a couple work shares, and we do virtual work shares typically once a month. So people come together and just share their work. Sometimes we have robust conversations about different topics in photography. It just depends on what the people who show up to these online events want to do with the time that we're together. So that's it. Thanks. I will field questions.
After reading all those books about time, I was wondering if it made you reflect differently on your earlier projects. Because I kind of was thinking about it like with the tattoo when you're touching people at like a very specific time in their lives when they're like fully covered. And I feel like I've noticed that theme a lot in your work, like finding people at this like peak after a long story.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I was wondering if your readings made you think of like anything interesting about that.
Not as interesting as what you just said. So, no, I haven't actually gone backwards in time thinking about my ruminations on time. So that's interesting. Now I have to set aside some time to actually think about that, which is hard. But mostly it's been, like the explorations and the research into time I've been applying to like the landscape work. So yeah, but thank you for putting that bug in my brain. Yeah.
I also really like time, and I was wondering if I could see that slide again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There are more books. There are many more books. Not all of them here have to do with time, but some of them do have to do with time, or they have to do with, I don't know, I don't like to say extreme landscapes, but important landscapes or important areas in the planet that are, some of them are kind of like the canary in the coal mine, or they're just very important to like how the planetary systems function. And then, just also the Seneca book. I love that. And it just gives insight into the way people have been considering nature and time and other topics like that throughout human existence. So like these philosophical considerations of those subjects, I'm very interested in too. Oh my God, so many questions. Yes, anyone? Oh yes. Hi.
I was curious to know if you felt like your work in forensics informed your work in any specific way, whether it was as almost an escape from or like alternatively like pushing you in a direction.
Yeah, so that sometimes I get asked that, and actually like the work I'm doing now is as a forensic photographer, and so I always say this too, if I need to have a day job, it's a great day job. But I also, again, coming from a background where I was like immersed in like my own photography and in the darkroom every day, it does become a challenge. And so I don't think it affects my portraiture or that landscape project that I'm working on, but I do have a project kind of like the pinhole a day project I was doing when I worked as a crime scene investigator. I do have a series now of lumen prints that I make while I'm at work. So I'll have the doctors cut very thin slices of organs while they're doing autopsies, and I do lumen prints of them.
I've seen
So-
that, and I was so curious to know how you got that. I'm some are these from animals?
Nah, they're people. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of like moral considerations. So people who work in forensics, sometimes it's difficult. Like I remember when I was working as a crime scene investigator, I got approached by a fairly large like European publication saying, "Oh, will you do a photo story on like what it's like to be a crime scene investigator?" And my agency just said no. So there are a lot of considerations. You know, I get project ideas in my head, but I feel very strongly about those moral questions. So like using information that I get from the job to inform a project, I don't think that's kosher, right? So it's almost like being in that world makes it a little more challenging for people who aren't aware of like the moral considerations that you have to make. So like that project, the Lumen print project, it allows me to make these images that can be quite beautiful of things that most people would not think are quite beautiful, but also they're anonymous. So there's no identification connected with them. Yeah. So there's no way to like tie something back to a particular person, which I think is the biggest consideration when it comes to forensics, because a lot of forensics, especially in the crime scene realm, has to do with identifying people. So if you're working with DNA or fingerprints or something like that, it can be tied back to a specific person. And for me, that just seems morally hazardous. So with these images, there's no way to tie them to an individual. So I'm okay with that. And my chief gave me the thumbs up to work on this. So I have his backing. Yes.
Have you ever conceived of photographing with large format?
Oh, yes, I do large format. So I do medium format and large format. When I'm traveling, especially internationally, I most often shoot medium format just for weight's sake.
If I'm correct, we didn't see any large format.
No, my portrait work is medium format. Probably most of the landscape work here was international. So that trip to when I was in Kilpisarvi, I had my large format camera there, and I did a lot of large format photography that wasn't in this presentation. Yeah.
Well, this was not quite a trick question, but basically I wanted to lead up to something. In the beginning, I think you were the first landscape photographs were all with a medium format and square.
Yes.
Sorry. And I think they were limited by the square format. They all wanted to be horizontal. And while you were talking and then showed a masked photographs, or how do you call them?
Like the sequence
they're not
images. Yeah, they're sequence
But
images.
the-
Yeah.
The put together photographs. I said, she fought the battle of the square format and won.
I mean, I don't see it as a battle. Like I'm a fan of the square format. Yeah, like that's a personal choice, right? So some people work 35 millimeter medium format in the various arrays of medium format, large format, and I do both. So yeah, it's just a choice.
Well, basically, what I wanted to say is that the square format is limited by the lenses that are produced for it, and most of them are not shift capable. Whereas large format and 35 millimeter are shift capable. And basically, what you're doing in your masked landscapes is shifting. And I think those are your most successful. They're fantastic.
Well, thank
Really
you.
Impressed.
Yeah, I find that there are instances where, especially with a landscape with a horizon, that if I don't have my large format, that yes, a square can be a little bit confining because you want to show more of the horizon. And so maybe that's the response. Maybe that initial sequenced image was a response to that desire to show the whole image. Although, again, I did have my large format and I did shoot that mountain with the large format camera, but in the final iteration, I preferred the kind of sequenced imagery. So, yeah,
I think those
Thank
are the
you.
most successful. Thank you.
thank you. Yes?
In your work exploring passage of time and volcanic spaces, are there any spaces that you'd like to go back to in the future?
Oh, hell yeah. So I did, so my travel is limited by the fact that I have to have a day job, and I also am now staying with my mom who's had some health issues. So I've done a couple like pretty short trips. And so I went to Vulcano, which is one of the islands, an Aeolian island, and Mount Etna in one trip to Italy and Sicily in particular. And I do have this. That is Vulcano, which is kind of a very manageable volcano to walk up. I mean, it's still kind of like, but you can get right up there, like, and that's the steam, the clouds in the background, but also the steam coming from the volcano. And there are a couple other Aeolian islands that I want to go back to, or I want to go to, and I would like to go back to Vulcano because I did not shoot any color film, but so you can't see it in these images, and I really want to see how it looks on film. You can see in the ground, that sulfuric green is really prominent or prevalent. And so this is one place I want to go back to. I really liked it here. And I want to go back to shoot more, but specifically to get that on film and see how that translates. Yeah, everywhere I go, I want to go back. So it's hard, like, do I go back here or do I go to a new place? And the new place always wins out. So, I mean, that's not a bad thing. I'm actually not complaining about that at all.
And mine's more of a comment than compliment, because the forensic question was asked. I really found a connection between the self-portraits for Pinhole that felt kind of like a rupture. In fact, that rupture was like an iteration that moved something along. And it was also the same time that you were doing forensic. Okay,
Yep.
forensic studies, or your job started.
Yep.
And to me, I'd love to see that work in conversation with this work. And I don't know, they look very different, but I can feel you as the artist in those two bodies of work. And I believe that they're united by an interest in time somehow.
Yeah,
It's just like, but that felt very strong to me, the urge.
Yeah, I've done, so when I've traveled to these landscapes, I've done some pinhole photography, some with me in it, but some without. So I kind of made the choice to take myself out of the pinhole images specifically in places like this. So when I'm traveling to other places or wherever, I'll still do self-portraits, but for some reason, I wanted to take myself out of these pinhole images. And I haven't loved them. So I do have pinhole images from here and from several other places that they're just not as successful to me. But I'm gonna keep doing it.
I was just thinking if someone was to, like, I'm always thinking about how would you write about someone's work, and those would be the two bodies of work, not to try to replicate them, but I see a thread between the two in your practice. It's something I want to offer.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's always great to share your work with other people because they see things that you don't necessarily see. Like we get a little bit myopic looking at our own work and we know what we're trying to achieve, or maybe sometimes we don't, but we have a vision of it and then people see other threads or other themes in there. So thank you. I'd definitely like to hear more about that like later. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a question about alternative policies, as, you know, as being under PLI, and knowing that you do film, knowing now, knowing that you do Lumen, but what other alternative policies do you just?
That's a good question. So I do a lot of them. I have a lot of like kind of side projects that didn't really fit into this presentation. So I will sort of choose the process based on the project. So like, for instance, I have a wet plate project that combines image and text. And so I do tintypes of objects and then I hand stamp text into the metal. I'm working on a platinum palladium series that's kind of like a retrospective where I'm going over images that I've taken like throughout my lifetime, usually making digital negatives of them and printing it as like a body of platinum palladium work. What else? I know I'm forgetting something. The Lumen project. I'm working on an amphitype project using mourning flowers that pertains to my dad passing away. There's probably more, but yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
She touched on alternative processes and then you're working with film. So in the curious one, I'm trying to investigate a lot of big processes. So did you go from a BA or BFA and you went to John Jay College?
No. So I got my bachelor's in 1993 and went straight to grad school. I went to Pratt and I got my master's in photography in 1996. And then I went to George Washington University in 2013 and got a master's in forensics there. Well, you know what? I lucked out. Actually, the guy who ran the crime scene aspect of that program writes the photography textbooks for forensic scientists. So I think he saw that I was a photographer and was like, cool. Because otherwise, there's no way I would have gotten into that program. I had to take science prerequisites. And let me tell you, I'll tell you later. I have stories about that. I mean, the classes that I most hated in high school, I did really well in as an adult and really enjoyed them and wanted to like keep studying chemistry. Like that's insane. But yeah, I feel like I was very lucky in the fact that he ran that program and accepted me into it and gave me a scholarship and all this stuff. So that was like just luck.
I just want to thank you and compliment you on the way you organized the presentation. It was really fascinating, and I love that you included the section on your reaction to the digital, onslaught.
Yes.
I found that really interesting because I'm someone who really has only, photographed since digital, so it's kind of, it was really interesting to hear how you dealt with that and what it felt like.
Not very well. I didn't deal with that very well at all. No, I mean, we use digital photography in my job now and, when I was doing crime scene and death investigation. So it's a tool and some people use it very well and some people really embrace it. But just for me, probably because I didn't grow up with it, I didn't study it in school and I was very immersed in darkroom photography. It just didn't resonate with me. And so like to my detriment, I wasn't doing any freelance work anymore and was like quite impoverished for quite a while because of that choice. But yeah.
In your job during the forensic photography, are there ever times, do you have to kind of turn off the aesthetic part of your sensibility to, in other words, what makes a good photograph for what you're doing in your profession, does it ever jive with what you've been?
Yeah. So the photography I do forensically is much different. It's very kind of formulaic, but there is like a way to work in kind of creativity and challenges as far as like improving how we photograph things. But no, the first time I attended an autopsy was while I was in grad school, and we went to my professor's medical examiner's office. And of course I was like a little bit nervous, and there was a body that was decomposing. Anyone who's sensitive to this stuff, just shut your ears. There's a body that was decomposing, and if you don't know, one of the things that happens is the skin starts to marble. So it's kind of the escape of the blood vessels are breaking down. And so you can see like this marbling pattern on the skin. And I just remember thinking that was really beautiful. And so all of my classmates who are not artists were like, okay, you're crazy. So I do see a lot of stuff at work that I would love to photograph. And that said, I do have another project that kind of relates to that, and it's very limited. I acquired a set of slides from NASA that are images of the Earth from above. And so I scanned them and made them into black and white digital negatives, and I'm pairing those with images that I've taken not from work, but from like teaching collections or other like sources. Because a lot of the first one that struck me, there was a river, like a delta, and it really looked like, to me, the sutures of the skull. And so I have a few pieces where I'm pairing these like images of the earth that are very abstracted with images of the human body. So I don't know. Yes, that's yet another thing I'm working on.
With all the choices of your day job, how did you decide on forensics?
I watched a lot of Law and Order and NCIS. I was always really fascinated by it, and I started taking just kind of one-off training classes at the University of New Haven, so I could stay with my mom for free and take these classes. And I really enjoyed them, but finally I had taken a few, and the guy who ran the program was like, listen, if you really want to do this, you need to go back to school and get your master's degree. So I said, okay. And yeah, I was just very interested in it.
Thank you, Dale.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.